Postcards from a Dying World, the podcast. For more than a decade, I've reviewed over 1,000 books that are mostly science fiction, horror, and bizarro. This feed will feature bonus audio I have produced over the years, as well as a monthly digest of reviews based on what I've read each month, plus the occasional bonus material about my own fiction. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. I know it's been a little bit since I did an episode, and I've been kind of taking a break because we've been doing all kinds of 40th anniversary special stuff for Blade Runner. So I was really busy with Blade Runner stuff. And now that anniversary is passed, also the anniversary for The Thing. It's a big day for us fans of that stuff. The first interview I'm doing is a big one with Tim Lebbon. I'm really excited to have him here. If you're not, I'm sorry, dog yelling. I will edit that out. But Tim, it's really exciting to have you here. We'll get a little bit into like different stuff, introducing you, your wider work as we go. But I know a lot of people like were introduced to you because of the film of The Silence.
Yeah, sure.
And of course, Pay the Ghost, which you got behind you, which was
there he is. Yeah,
it's a very underrated movie based on one of your stories.
Yeah.
I love Pay the Ghost. That was great. But you've been in the salt mines doing science fiction, horror, media tie-in stuff for a long time. You're one of the most prolific authors we've got going in this generation. So I'm really excited to have you here.
Well, great. It's great to be here. Thanks, David. Yeah, I was just chatting to a friend today who's a bit unwell. I went to visit him, and he was asking me, how many novels have you written now, Tim? And it almost shocked me when I said, I think 47.
Wow.
I'm either working on the 47th or 48th, and I wonder if it's too many. But yeah, so it's almost 25 years next year since my first novel was out. So on average, it's only 2 a year, you know?
Yeah. Well, 2 years, pretty good clip.
Yeah, I guess.
What is your origin story with science fiction, horror, and just reading in general? Because you have to be a good reader to be a writer at this level, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, my mum got me into reading at a really young age. I was reading books from as long as I can remember. From the age of 5, 6, 7, I'd read prolifically. 8, 9, 10, I was reading a book a day. I'd help at the local library with my friend Amadin. We'd go and help them restock books, and they'd let us take a couple home. The first ones I can remember being addicted to are the Willard Price adventure novels. He wrote a series of books about two brothers collecting animals around the world for their father's zoo. It's probably not, particularly PC anymore, but just great adventure. And I think I got my sort of seeding of the love of darker stuff there, because there were Cannibal Adventure was one of them. That was pretty grim. And then my mum gave me a book to read when I was 10 or 11, and that was The Rats by James Herbert. And that instantly elevated me from reading Enid Blyton, Willard Price kids books to James Herbert, Stephen King, Clive Barker, and then the whole world of it opened up for me then.
Well, and I think for the American listeners, they don't probably understand the level to which James Herbert was so important to British horror fans, because
I mean he was the British Stephen King for a good period. You know, if there was any horror books on the shelf in a bookshop here, it would have been Stephen King, James Herbert, Clive Barker, Dean Koontz, Richard Lehman. That was probably it. You know, some stores had a really poor horror shelf, and it was those 5 writers.
Well, I still to this day think Dominion by James Herbert is one of the greatest concepts for a novel.
Oh, the Rats, the third Rats novel. Yeah, it's a grim old novel. I mean, I don't reread him an awful lot. I was lucky enough, I did get to meet him once, and I've met lots of horror writers, and I sort of don't. We're all just normal people. I tend not to get starstruck that much, but I met James Herbert at a convention. I said, "Oh, Mr. Herbert, I've just got to shake your hand and say, you know, your book, The Rats, got me into horror. My mum gave it to me when I was 10, And he said, "Oh, you had a very liberal mum." But yeah, The Rats, The Dark, The Fog, and he wrote some really, real gruesome slasher stuff, but also stuff like The Jonah and Fluke, the story of a man who thinks he's a dog or a dog who thinks he's a man. Real quirky stuff as well. I haven't reread anything by him in years, and I'm afraid to be honest.
Yeah. Well, do you have, so would you consider Rats to be like the breakthrough, like one that really kind of got you into everything, or
Yeah, it's
that
The
would be
Rats.
the one?
Yeah, it's The Rats that got me reading horror. I'm thankful that Herbert got me. I progressed then on to King, because
Yeah.
my favorite novel is probably The Stand. So I much prefer King to Herbert, but Herbert was definitely my sort of pivot point from reading kids' books into reading, adult books.
Now that got you interested in things, but was there one that was like a light bulb reading experience for becoming a storyteller, or getting into that?
So I'd always written. I wrote when I was 7, 8, 9. I was writing stories, and then when I was in my early teens, or 10, 11, 12, I was writing rip-off stories. I was reading like before I got into horror, I was reading Colin Forbes. He wrote some adventure novels, and there's one he wrote called Tramp in Armor, which was a war novel, and I did a total rip-off of that. So I was writing through my teens and reading loads of King and loads of horror, and trying to expand the stuff I was reading. I went through that awkward phase just thinking, oh, I've read, that nobody's as good as Stephen King. It's no point reading anything else. Only for a year or two, and then started reading loads of other stuff, and my whole sort of horizon expanded outwards. But as for becoming a writer, I think it was probably my late teens where I actually wrote my first short story called Black Heart, with a view to having it published, with a view to try and get it published. Late teens, early 20s. But I wrote all through my teens, but only got serious with it in my sort of early to mid 20s, I think. And then sold my first short story in my mid 20s, and sold my first novel, Mesmer, when I was, how old was I? 28, 29. So a longish process. I'm not one of these, you hear about people writing their first novel, instantly selling it and for a major hit. But I wrote my first novel. I did sell my first novel, but I think I got £200 for it and sold a couple of hundred copies,
Now, as in a career as long as yours, where you've written as many books,
making me feel old now.
Well, as accomplished, but yeah, but you've done a lot quickly, like, honestly. And I think that's one of the things that it kind of is so impressive about, when you have a body of work like that. Do you feel like, short story wise and like novel wise, that you have breakout works where you think that, like, this is where I really came together as a writer, or where you really found your voice? Or
I think novel wise, possibly The Nature of Balance, which was a novel that Leisure Books published. It was partly because it was my first sort of mass market deal.
It was the first of your books that I read, by the way.
Oh, really? Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it was probably only my fourth or fifth novel, third or fourth. But I think that was the one where I sort of settled into my own particular, I think a writer's style progresses all the way through their career. I still like to think I'm working on my voice and, settling into my own particular style. But that was the one where I realized, I wrote the novel and thought, yeah, that this is the sort of stuff I want to be telling. Definitely The Nature of Balance. And that's even reflected now in stuff like Eden and The Last Storm, which are in which nature features heavily. In Nature of Balance, it was sort of, I didn't realize till afterwards, but it was a sort of influenced by The Terror by Arthur Machen, who's a UK writer from the turn of the last century, who I'm quite influenced by.
Right. Now, you've also, so for people who may be new to your work, you've also done a lot of tie-in work, like a lot of work with franchises that are already in existence, and you've done some really fantastic stuff within that realm. And one of the reasons why I particularly like, there's certain writers who I think do tie in really well, and it's usually for me, it's a lot of times the ones that that's not the only work that they do, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I just like John Shirley's Hellblazer novels, for example, are just, they could stand alone on their own. In much the
Yeah.
same way, like for example, that first Predator novel that you did of the trilogy, I remember thinking to myself when I was reading it, like, gosh, this is such a great science fiction novel, regardless of the franchise
Yeah.
that it comes from, right?
Yeah.
So
That'd be fun. Yeah.
yeah, so could you just give us a little bit about some of the different franchises you've worked in and what was kind of the most fun, like
Right.
putting your
Yeah.
stamp
Yeah.
on it?
I mean, so did I kill you in that trilogy? I can't remember. So when I
Yeah,
wrote the Rage War trilogy, it was such a wide ranging, like you say, it was a big sci-fi, is a sort of far future space war novel, really, a
yeah,
trilogy. Just happening to feature predators and aliens because that's what my publisher wanted me to do. And that was a lot of fun because there were so many characters in those books that I needed so many names for characters. So I just went on my Facebook page and said, "Do you want to have your face bitten off by a predator or an alien?" And
yeah.
can
I
I?
don't think I was one of them, but I do
I've got a
remember
funny
people.
feeling. I've
Yeah.
got a funny feeling. So I'll have a look. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. But I've done that wasn't my first. I think my first one was a novelization of The Cabin in the Woods for Titan. Maybe it was Hellboy novel. I think Hellboy novel might be my
Yeah,
first.
that Hellboy novel was great. I remember reading that. Yeah.
Unnatural Selection, yeah, and that came about because I got really friendly with Chris Golden, and he asked me to write a Hellboy novel for a line he was editing for Simon and Schuster. That went on to me and Chris then writing 8 or 9 novels together and a screenplay and various other bits and pieces. So I've done Hellboy and Star Wars and Firefly and Alien and Predator. I think one of my favorites was Alien Out of the Shadows. That's a standalone Alien novel, part of a loose trilogy that I wrote with Chris and Jim Moore. That was sort of the concept for that came direct from Fox to Titan. So I didn't get to choose where I placed my Alien novel, but I got to write a Ripley story.
Right.
Set between Alien and Aliens, which has its obvious problems because she wakes up in Aliens and doesn't remember it. But
Yeah.
that was the most fun to write because I'm an alien nut. It's my my biggest love. I've got an little
Right.
alien on my desk. I love it. The movies, the law of diminishing returns in the movies, I think, but the first two, Aliens, is still my favorite film of all time.
Yeah.
Probably a lot of nostalgia there, but it still holds up. So that was a great fun experience, and also to hear it dramatized by Dirk Maggs for Audible, with a full ensemble cast, including Rutger Hauer as Ash. That was awesome. And Dirk did a great job of adapting that and into a 10-hour drama. It feels like you're immersed in a movie. It's just brilliant stuff.
Oh, I'll have to try that.
It's great.
That sounds really cool. Now, you worked in a really interesting era of Star Wars. Was that idea given to you, or did you seek out that?
No, that was given to me. I remember the call from my agent. We were talking about other stuff, and he said, "Oh, by the way, do you want to do Star Wars? I've just had a call from their editor." And I said, "Well, yes, definitely," because I'm not I'm a Star Wars fan. I'm not the biggest Star Wars geek, but I'm a big fan of the movies. So just had to say yes. And the money was quite good. So yeah, did that. But yeah, as soon as I put the phone down, I thought, oh shit, there's like 150 Star Wars novels. If mine is based in the middle of there, am I going to have to read 50 Star Wars novels to make sure I'm, in the timeline? And then they said your novel is going to be the earliest in the timeline, The Dawn of the Jedi, and that was great because there was a series of comics that I based it around. I got to talk with the comic creators about it, and then just pitched some ideas to the publisher. And pretty much every idea I pitched, they were like, "No, you can't do that. You can't do that because we're using that wormhole in a future story, or you can't destroy that planet." So then I went away and pretty much made up my own Star Wars story that just happened to be set in the Dawn of the Jedi universe with my own characters, Some of the locations I used, but I also made up some planets so that I could blow them up. Yeah, it was good. It was a real fantastic experience, and surprisingly easy. There was not much editorial input into it as it, I mean, like, I didn't deliver it and they said, oh no, you've got to change all this. I delivered it and they went, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, well, it was a good time for you to be doing that kind of story in Star Wars too, because you had been working on those really dark fantasy novels that you'd been doing at the time.
Yeah, so that's interesting observation, because that's the reason they gave me the novel, because they wanted something that felt more like dark fantasy in space. So that's interesting that you bring that up.
Yeah. Well, I always assumed that was the reason why, and that's why it worked so well. All right, so now, listen, I know you shouldn't have favorite children, and it's always the most recent work that you love, but the novel that you wrote that most kicked my ass, like up and down, was definitely The Silence. And I read it long before the movie. I read it, I think, the year it came out in paperback. It was my read of the year that year, which I take very seriously on my blog every year, and I read 100 books a year. So it's no little feat to rise above everything and be the read of the year. Now listen, regardless of what happened with the movie or what happened with A Quiet Place, and by the way, my experience with, because I knew The Silence was in production, and I had read the book, and the first time I was at a movie and I saw a trailer for A Quiet Place, and halfway through the trailer I said, when did The Silence cast Emily Blunt? That's crazy.
Right. We had a brother-in-law,
Yeah, exactly. But so for people who don't know, The Silence is a monster apocalypse novel, kind of similar in tone to, I would say, like Day of the Triffids or something like that.
Yeah.
That's all built on these creatures that hunt sound. And I want to get into a little bit about, like, one of the things that kicked my butt most about that book here in a second, but where did this novel come from, and like, did you know you had something really strong on your hands, like, while you were writing it? Or I love The Silence.
I love it as well. It is, despite what happened with the movie, which led on to overseas sales and audiobook sales and stuff like that, which is all really exciting and gratifying.
Yeah.
Despite all that, it was one of my favorite novels when I wrote it. And it's, most of my novels, I work hard to come up with a story idea and to mold it. Excuse me. But I do remember, and a novel rarely hits me, the concept rarely hits me hard, and I go, wow, that's it. I do remember the moment where I just thought, because I love destroying the world, I've done it loads, when I thought a novel about monsters that hunt by sound, and I'll call it The Silence. And it was like one line down on a bit of paper, and that was the idea for the novel. I rarely write anything and think, oh my God, this is great. I'm more likely to be writing something and think, oh, this just isn't working. I don't know, this isn't going to work. And that's always the case in the middle of a novel. And a lot of writer friends of mine are sort of the same, because you're so close to a novel at the time.
Yeah.
I do remember finishing it and delivering it, and my publisher, my editor, saying that, you've really delivered on what you, because I sold it to the publisher before I finished the novel, obviously, on a sort of treatment. And they said, yeah, you've really delivered. We're really going to push this hard. And it worked out great. Luckily, thanks to a brilliant manager I've got in LA who structured the deal really and got it made in an amazingly quick time. I think the book was out in 2015 and the movie came out in 2019. It's a 4-year gap between publication and movie hitting the screens is almost unheard of. It doesn't happen that often. So I was very, very lucky with that as well, and lucky to get.
I think it's such a powerful book. Like, I mean, immediately when I was reading, I was like, someone's gonna get this book and make it. Like, this is,
Yeah.
the whole time I was reading it, I was like, this has to be a movie. Now listen, my biggest problem with the movie was for me is that the most powerful scene in the book, the scene that just most destroyed me,
Yeah.
I just didn't feel like they captured it the way you did. And
I know the scene you're talking about. Yeah.
The dog scene. Yeah.
Right.
And listen, it means, now when you were talking about being starstruck, the only time I've ever, because I grew up in punk rock where all the bands were close, but I knew all the bands. And so meeting all the writers, when I started meeting writers, I've only kind of been starstruck twice.
Right.
Clive Barker and Richard Matheson.
Right. Yeah.
And when I met Richard Matheson, talking about the dog scene in I Am Legend, like the scene with the dog, the chapter with the dog in I Am Legend is the first time I ever cried reading a book when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, the scene in the silence with the dog is like the first thing I thought when I finished that scene was, holy shit, Tim Lebbon did it. he got a scene that in my mind rivals that scene from I Am Legend, partially because, and different from I Am Legend, I knew it was coming.
Yeah, right.
I knew this was going to happen. And it still hurt so bad reading it.
It's such a brutal scene. Interestingly, I can tell you that they did film the scene. But it didn't end up in the final film. So,
okay.
And Stanley was the guys who wrote the screenplay wrote it as I'd written it, the scene. Stanley was very, yes, this needs to be in the film. It's going to be horrible to film. And he filmed it, and he was really proud of his scene, proud of the acting, proud of the moment. And then, so before it went on Netflix, it was going to be distributed through theaters. And then I think the distributor went bust just when it was going to happen. So they ended up selling it to Netflix. But previous to that, the distributor had said, this film's great. You got to lose the dog scene. You got to change it. It's too brutal, So they refilmed it as it is now, where he, this is spoilers for people, but where he presses the door thing and you actually see him putting his arm around the dog, and then you see a finger press the door button, and the door opens, the dog jumps out and disappears, presumably to get eaten by vesps, but they did actually film the scene, and if it had sold straight to Netflix wouldn't have given a fuck. It would have been, that scene's in,
right.
So somewhere on a cutting room floor somewhere, and I should ask the director, he and I are still friends, it would be really interesting to see a director's cut, and I should run that by the director. He'll have the reel somewhere.
Because that for me, because that's the most powerful part of the book. That's where that's where I literally had to put the book down and be like, I knew this was coming. And one of the things that I thought was so amazing about it and made it such a great trick, and this is why I didn't make a spoiler warning, is I knew it was coming.
Yeah.
Everyone, it's coming, and that's part of one of the things. It's like the bomb under the chair.
Yeah.
And it's to me, it's honestly, I've said before that I thought that scene, that part of the book is one worthy of being taught. In writing horror. So, all right,
that's strange, isn't it? I've killed billions of people in my writing, and that scene is honestly the scene I've got most reaction, positive and negative, from readers. I've seen a lot of reviews for the book saying I can't read this book because it's got cruelty to dogs in it. And they stopped reading it, and that's absolutely valid. People react to different things, and I'm a dog lover. I absolutely adore dogs. We lost our dog a few weeks ago that we'd had for 14 years, and we're still all really upset about it. And I think it's very strange how, another reason that book I think was powerful for me, and hopefully powerful for readers, is that essentially it's my family. So when I wrote the book, my daughter was Ali's age and my son was Jude's age in the book. They're not my kids in the book, but it's basically my family and what would happen, and my dog. You know, we had a dog, his name was Blue. In the book, he's called Otis. And that's because my wife wanted to call him Otis. So really, you know, that's why that's so powerful, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, well, and it, gosh, it still hits me, and I think that a lot of times it can be like a scene like that really just hammers. You know, it can be a dividing line for, you
Yeah.
know, I have a friend that jokes that with like Mad Max Fury Road, there you either get the guitar player guy or you don't,
Right.
and that can be the dividing line on whether you can do Fury Road or not.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I think with the silence, you know, that chapter can, some people probably just can't do it. I know, like, and I've mentioned him a couple of times, and I'm excited. I'm visiting him this week, but John Shirley, yeah, he and I have talked about, he cannot stand the ending of the movie of The Mist. He cannot take it.
Yeah.
Cannot.
Yeah.
And he and I have argued about the ending of that movie so many times because he just cannot wrap his head around the idea that a father could do that. So he cannot take the movie.
Right.
And I know for some people with the silence that's the thing. So
yeah.
Anyways, let's get to talking about The Last Storm, which is the new book, and we're going to talk a little bit without spoilers and get into it.
Okay.
Now, so the Last Storm is, a lot of people know there's no way that science fiction can write about the near future without getting into climate change issues. That's why Cli-fi has become a term.
Yeah.
Become a thing. However, you've written about environmental issues throughout your career. You know, environmental issues are something that's kind of a running theme in your work. Now, before we get into like how I kind of took this book, and I want to see if your interpretation or my interpretation fits what you think of it. But where did The Last Storm come from? Like, what's the origin of this story? And, you know, what happened with this one?
Okay. So my previous novel was called Eden, which was also a very overtly climate change sci-fi novel. I've heard people, and again, it's difficult. I'm so close to my books, sometimes I don't really see it. I've heard people say Eden was the hopeful one, and this is the grim one, and maybe they're right. But this one actually came from I wrote a short story about 15 or 18 years ago. That was in an anthology called The Darker Side, edited by John Pelan, a friend of mine. That story was called Hell Came Down, and it was basically inspired by reading stuff like Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World in Charles Fort magazine, about rains of creatures, rains of fish and animals. And I just thought, wouldn't it be cool if you had rains of spiders and snakes and then creatures you don't quite know. So when I was thinking about another novel to write after Eden, I didn't want to write a direct sequel of any sort, but I wanted to carry on the climate change thing. And I didn't really have a strong idea that hit me. So I started looking back through some of my old stories, and I remembered Hell Came Down and thought that actually is a fairly cool idea for a novel. Because I'd had adapted that short story into a screenplay, which never really went anywhere. But subsequent to that, that's how I decided on that for the next novel.
Yeah, and so now one of the comparisons that I made, and look, the cross between this and this is like kind of a corny marketing thing, but I know from doing book reviews for more than a decade that people want you to say like, well, what's it like? What do you,
right.
And I kind of hate to reduce something because I know how hard when you work on a novel, you're trying to make your own thing. But like one of the things that I kind of sold this on is it's not as post-apocalyptic as something like The Road, because there's still internet, there's still cars. And I really loved that part of the world building. But because a lot of people haven't done that. But I kind of got this feeling of this kind of Dust Bowl America kind of, but like a story like a Firestarter or The Fury, like John Ferris, kind of set in that world, because those stories are always in our world. So I kind of had this feeling of those books of like because the Rainmakers kind of with their, so there are these characters in the book called the Rainmakers who have this ability to make rain, which in a post-apocalyptic world would be quite a superpower.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. How do you feel about that comparison to those books? Like,
Yeah.
with this
No,
movie?
that sounds again not a conscious thing. I think the thing for me with the setting of the book, the setting for me is always a vital part of the novel. Eden wasn't set anywhere in particular. If you read Eden, I never name even the continent where Eden exists. Most people read it. My agent read it, and I think most people read it that it's in somewhere in North America, but I never name that. With The Last Storm, I did want to write like a near future, not too apocalyptic, but the world's going to shit. The climate change point of no return has been passed. There's famine, there's drought, and tell this story against that backdrop. And what I really wanted to do is write a road, Dust Bowl road novel set in North America, and that was always my aim. So you hit it spot on there, really. Being a British writer, it was a bit of a challenge. I visited the States loads of times, and I got loads of American friends. I did loads of research. I think that's partly why I kept the location of the novel mostly out of big cities. It's all in like small town America or the farming belt, because I wanted it to feel more like a world where not everything is functioning anymore. But I didn't want to do that in an urban setting. I wanted it to be sort of rural. Lots of my writing's set rurally anyway. I love the countryside. We live in the countryside, and I love it. And that's why I still got a passion for nature. So, yeah, that was where that came from.
Well, and there is a really grand tradition of great end of the world novels set in Britain.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Wyndham,
and
big Wyndham fan.
Yes. So, but doing this one, having this Americana thing to it was important to the feel of the novel, because so much of it is that feeling of the vast distances traveled. And one of the things I really appreciated about The Last Storm is that it has an epic feel and scope, but it's not a doorstop novel.
Right.
And that is one of the magic tricks that I think our generation of writers have done a little bit better, is being able to tell these epic stories without the bloat. And I appreciate that. So about
it's again, you're good at hitting the nail on the head about things. It's the epic scope of it. I couldn't have told that story set in Britain. I don't think it would have felt very different. The American setting's got this. It's almost a Western feel to it in some way. Just the epic landscapes, huge skies, big skies. We don't have that in Britain. We don't have very many remote areas in Britain where you can get lost.
Right. Well, and one of the things I want to say about my experience in loving this novel, and anyone who follows my book reviews on, well, I don't think anyone else would notice this, but a lot of times when I finish a book and I rate it on Goodreads, I'll do the star rating and then I'll write my review. And a lot of times a 4-star book becomes a 5-star book.
Right.
And The Last Storm was a perfect example of a book that I gave 4 stars to at first. And then like as I wrote about it, and this is, I think, is one of the things that I really love about, one of the reasons why I've kept reviewing books over time, because no one's paying me to do this.
Right.
No one's, is that I learn so much more about the books when I dig into them and I really get into them. And I will admit when I first read The Last Storm, I wasn't, because when I first started it, I went in totally cold. All I knew was Tim Lebbon, climate change.
Okay.
And I thought the cover looked awesome. And when I went into it, I didn't know there was a supernatural aspect to it. And it took me a little while to get into it. And when we get into spoilers, we'll talk about why I think that was so important. But what I really want to sell to people is that that it's a feature, not a bug.
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The supernatural aspects of it. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think because a lot of really good Cli-fi is hard science,
Mm.
I like the supernatural aspect of this one.
Yeah.
But
Good.
let's let's just do a final, like, before we get into spoilers about this. What are the things that you really want people to know who are on the fence? Like, yeah, this sounds cool. Like, what, how are you pitching The Last Storm as book?
Ooh. So I guess I pitch it as a climate change thriller with supernatural elements. The big part of it for me is the family dynamic. I write about families a lot, as you noted in The Silence. Eden, not so much, but then Eden started with a group of explorers who sort of acted like a family, but were good together. Whereas the family in The Last Storm start estranged. Virtually all mother, father, daughter estranged from each other. And I wanted to write about a family sort of struggling to rediscover itself and bring itself back together. And there's a big chase element to the book as well. It's not just the family involved. There's a vengeful person involved as well who sort of drives the story, really. Just a good sci-fi, Cli-fi road trip horror chase novel, thriller, love story, naval romance, everything apart from the last bit.
Well, one of the things, and I think maybe this comes from doing a lot of the sci-fi media tie-in work that you're doing. Sorry for the motorcycles outside if you heard that. But doing a lot of that work, you've gotten really good at world building. And the world building in this book is something that we'll dig into in spoilers. But I just want to mention that like the atmosphere that you created in this book is really top notch. And I think The Silence might still be my favorite of your work.
Right.
This is a really fantastic novel that I think might sneak up on some people, and I think it's there's a lot of heavy thematic elements that we're going to have to talk about in spoilers. So I really want to sell to people, like, go, if you haven't got the book yet, this is a good point to say, yep, Tim and David, you did a good job selling this. I'm going to go buy it. I suggest for my local store, Mysterious Galaxies. Mysterious Galaxy, I always say plural. But they sell it on their website. You don't have to go to Amazon necessarily, but just get it, read it, and come back, because I have this unique opportunity to pick this writer's brain about this book that I love. So I'm going to start doing that here soon. And I don't want Tim to worry about spoilers the rest of this time. So you've got your warning now, people. We're gonna spoil this book, and I have waited. I'm waiting to release it till it's out, so they have no excuses.
Stuff. So go buy it and then come back and listen to the last bit.
Yep. So we're now in spoilers. I want to talk about the world building. So the choice that choice of making the world somewhat functional, but very Dust Bowl and very, because the first time I believe it's Karina says to Ash, like, hey, I saw this on the internet. I was a little, like, it took me a second, because I was like, I just, in my head, I was going to Mad Max, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So this was a very conscious decision, but it has a lot of storytelling implications. Can you talk about that decision as a writer to make the world somewhat functional?
Yeah, I think I just didn't want to write something it's an apocalyptic novel, not a post-apocalyptic novel. It's written in a place where the world is slowly starting to fall apart due to climate change, which is pretty much where we are now, I guess, in some respects.
Well, one of the most powerful scenes. There's a scene, and I have the quote here. The park itself is marked by drought. Grass is dead. A large pond contains a mere puddle of muddy water, and a few scruffy ducks pad across its oily surface. Hardy trees persist here and there, but planting beds are home to cacti and a few swaths of invasive devil grass. Even in the city, and this is the important part that I want to talk about, even in the city, they don't call it climate crisis anymore or global warming, any other name that might have been used to urge positive action. Now this was the norm. I loved this part because it's saying that these people are defeated, basically, and that climate change has turned to just, you know,
yeah,
they're lost. The world is lost.
But also, I sort of, I hope I try and imply in the book that's the case, but also people do feel defeated, but they're also adapting. And there's a lot of scenes in the small towns and the farming areas where people are adapting to what's been happening, some in good ways, some in bad ways. And I see that as a lot of my books are fairly grim, but that's a positive thread to this novel. I think the fact that there's an adaptation going on to a awful situation.
I know you don't want people to think that they're going to be in nothing but grim territory. There is fun to be had here, but
yeah,
there are some of us who enjoy to read the darker than dark, black, grim stuff. And so
I've sort of got this reputation. There's not much humor in my books, and I don't know why, because I'm fairly sort of level-headed and light-hearted, but maybe I get all the dark stuff down in the books. I'm trying to put a bit more. I'm doing different forms of writing now. I'm doing some scripts for audio stuff, and there's a lot more humor in there. Not quite sure why that is, but yeah, it's not all a grim fest, everyone. There are fun scenes, and there's certainly with Jesse, I think the father character, he's sort of fun a lot of the time.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I had fun reading this book, so that's not well. But let's talk about the Rainmakers. So their powers were always there from the beginning, because the seed of the idea was the raining creatures, right?
Yeah.
So you always had the Rainmakers have the supernatural power. What I think is thematically powerful about the Rainmakers in this book, whether it's intentional or not, is that you have this dead, dying world, and here are these people that would be like the Avengers of this world, right?
Yeah.
Because they have this power, but it's painful.
Yeah.
It hurts, and it's not something they want to do, right?
Right. It's painful and it's damaging. It's almost a gift that's come down through their bloodline that they don't really want. It would have been too easy just to have them. Yeah, we can make rain. We'll go, because they'd solved the problem. They travel across America making rain every day they stopped. To have it as something that pains them and is mentally damaging as well just made it a much more interesting novel to write, I think.
Right. And so this family with Jesse, Karina, and Ash, like the power that they have, this rain-making ability, is part of what, it is what tears their family apart. So
yeah.
And so I think it was important from a storytelling perspective to have this unique gift that they have be the thing that tears them apart. That was obviously a big storytelling choice. So talk about that family dynamic for a little bit and what it meant for you.
Yeah, well, exactly that. I always wanted to start the novel with the family torn apart. So the mother, Karina, doesn't have the gift, but she knows that Jesse has it, and she knows what the gift did to Ash, which we're in spoiler zone now, which so Jesse
spoil away.
In the opening chapter, which I think is one of my best opening chapters, and I really love it. I love how it turned out. Jesse is trying to make money by bringing down rain to help a drug dealer who's losing his crop. So Jesse's basically doing it for the family to earn $50,000, whatever he's being paid. But he brings down creatures that kill the drug dealer and his henchmen. and Jesse gets shot in the face before, and that's the end of the chapter. So, and then it jumps ahead quite a bit then to a time where Jesse's daughter Ash has exhibited the gift and has started building her own apparatus to use to bring down rain. And she's already bringing down different creatures. So Jesse can't countenance an existence where his daughter's doing all these terrible things. So he tries to take the gift from her, but in doing so, he thinks he kills her. So the novel starts with him and his wife estranged.
Mm-hmm. And I'm gonna make a comparison that is a positive to me, but some people might not think so. Right. But it's got kind of a Last Jedi thing where Luke is, walked away from walked away from his gifts, or Obi-Wan recently, turned himself off from the Force in a sense, because he sees the negative that it's brought, and it takes this crisis or realizing, that his daughter might still be alive, that brings him back to it.
Exactly. And that was the, to use a screenwriting term, inciting incident. I think Karina knocking at his door and saying, I think I've seen Ash on the news, she's bringing down rain. Because Jesse, Jesse thinks basically the poor bastard thinks he's caused his daughter's death. So he retreats to the hills. He builds a cabin in the hills and cuts himself off from the whole world. Whereas Karina hasn't stopped looking for Jesse, doesn't believe she's dead. She spent, I'm not sure what the time term is, like 5 or 6 years looking for her daughter, and angry and furious at Jesse, who doesn't. He's just sat on his own with his dog, building defenses against the flash floods and whatever. So I thought it was a lovely way to start, her knocking on his door. She hasn't seen him for years. And she says, Ash is still alive. And he says, okay, we've got to stop her. And instantly brings these two estranged people back together. Yeah.
And I love the element that it brings, as far as, well, and that whole scene with the inciting incident with Jesse being on the farm and his wife coming back and saying that she's there. It was very, I felt his fear to go back. Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. He doesn't want to face, he hasn't made rain since. His apparatus is on the top shelf in his room gathering dust. So he sort of starts off in a sort of a cowardly place in some ways. He doesn't want to face anything.
No, when I talked about how my estimation of the book rose as I thought about it, one of the things that I just absolutely love, but it didn't click with me until I started writing about the book, just fully click with me, but it was always there, of course, is that the theme of the creatures raining down being so connected to basically this idea that we destroyed this world, and in order to call on the universe to bring the water back, it can't be done without calling on this kind of dark magic that brings these creatures out. Is almost like you can have water, but you're gonna have to deal with a kind of vengeance of nature, right?
Yeah, it's there's implications to what you do.
And it took me really getting towards the end of the book to really, and that's fine. That's kind of how it should be revealed. You shouldn't see it too early, right?
No, right, absolutely. Yeah. It's sort of a building,
right.
You're realizing what's going on at the same time that Ash is realizing what's going on.
Was that something that just kind of came during the writing process of the theme, or was that something that you thought about early? Because
it just came during the process. I tend not to plan a massive amount. So even the idea of the alternate world, Skunksville, and then these strange creatures that come from there. When I was first thinking about the novel, I don't think I was really going to explore that much. And then as I got into this the alternate world that they see, we only get a glimpse of it through the Rainmaker's eyes, only a really brief glimpse. I just thought it was a really cool idea to have this other place where there are weird creatures, but also strange humanoid creatures in the distance, who are who's sort of getting closer and closer the more Ash is using her power, and then it's like the universe notices you. It's a really cosmic horror idea, really. It's a Lovecraftian thing.
Yeah.
She's noticed by the universe, and they're interested, and they come,
Right. And you just happened on something that I wrote and deleted like several times in my review, which is I didn't want to give away in my review at any point that this is a cosmic horror Cli-fi thing, right? It's just like, for example, with John's recent Cli-fi novel Stormland, I didn't want to give away how cyberpunk it was for a lot of people for a long time until I realized that they were doing it in the marketing, and then I was like, okay, well, you're doing it in the marketing. Whereas here, I really think that it's a awesome reveal, the cosmic nature of it, because we know there's a supernatural aspect.
Yeah.
Right. And but if you read Ferris's The Fury, right, and the twins like have the supernatural power, but it's not cosmic, it's supernatural, but and all supernatural to a degree is cosmic. I get that. But the level to which there's the Lovecraftian nature of this book, I really felt like was something that the readers should discover, because the organic nature of how it kind of came out in the book, top notch. Loved it.
Yeah, thank you. And that's purely a product of me sort of welcoming it in as a bigger idea than it ever was going to be. So, and that's why it's not all there at the beginning. That's why as the book goes on, because writing a novel is also a weird experience, because I did it longhand. It's the only novel I've ever written longhand.
That's interesting.
Big pile of notebooks, which was so I'm good friends with Rio Ewers, Canadian writer, who's just
been on the show twice.
Sorry?
Yeah, Rio's been on twice. So
is he? He's a good dude. He's a really, really good friend of mine, and I'm a big fan of his. And he writes everything longhand, and he talks to me about it and how great it is. So I just thought, I'm going to try that. So I bought all these lovely notebooks and fountain pens. Bearing in mind, my handwriting is terrible. And then I had these romantic notions of sitting on top of local Welsh mountains writing, and then fucking COVID hit. So I wrote the whole novel longhand in books in my house during COVID with my family. My daughter finishing uni, my son finishing A-levels, my wife working. So it was a case of finding a quiet place and opening a book and writing. So yeah, and I honestly think that the writing process longhand meant that ideas tended to build slower through the book. And I think that's because I wasn't referring so much to a set of notes. I was just sitting down writing. I wasn't going back and editing as I went through. I just let it flow, and then did sort of edits as I awful long time typing it up. So it sort of changed the writing process, and hopefully in a good way. So yeah.
Well, I'm a big outliner, and I like to handwrite my outlines for sure. But I haven't taken the step of trying to. I've written entire short stories, but I've never written an entire novel by hand.
I left it to the end to transcribe it, and that just took forever. But it was a good editing process, actually typing up what I'd written. Like I said,
how much do you think you changed from the longhand to when you were transcribing it? Like, did it change a bit, or?
Structurally, not an awful lot, but just the sort of flow of the writing. So I sort of did a half edit when I typed it in, language wise, and then did like structural stuff. But then not an awful lot. I tend to write, my finished novels tend to be fairly close to my first draft structurally, unless my editor comes along and says this needs changing. In this case, there's probably there's 8,000 or 10,000 words cut out from the original novel, which is just a bit, I can't remember what it was now, a bit more world building, a couple of incidents that didn't really add to the story. So
Yeah. Well, and so in that Lovecraftian kind of revenge feel, it's funny because I usually point to what I could consider like mission statements of novels. Is one of the things I like to write about in reviews, where I feel like this is where the mission statement was. And I didn't find like one particular sentence or thing, but I felt like that was a huge part of it. And what's funny to think about is a lot of times when I talk to writers about like mission statement parts, a lot of times they are the ones that they happened upon, you know, that wasn't planned. It's just like now I know what I'm going for, and this thought occurs to me. Now, before we talk about Ash and C, which I do want to talk about a little bit, can I read you my favorite sentence from the book? Which was, well, it's two sentences. My favorite passage: on a landscape fried dry by terrible drought and baked day after day by a merciless sun, fire was a demon that stalked from place to place, searching for where to settle its blazing roots.
That's like,
that's some good shit right there. I put it in my review and talked about I just love that those two sentences, just because I'm a person that and I've written a Cli-fi novel myself, and I find the fear of the future and the isolation that I believe that this future is bringing down on people that are not paying close enough attention to it is really horrifying to me. That sentence and the idea of fire being this demon that's stuck, because I live in California, so I've survived some wildfires, and I've seen them, and so I found that to be particularly horrifying. So I just wanted to give big thumbs up.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that sounded okay. Yeah.
It sounded more than okay. It was incredible. Now, C and Ash are an important relationship in the book, because I think C, as a character, she kind of she's outside of the whole Rainmaker thing, so she provides an important role for us. There's some interesting character dynamics, not just them, but I can't remember when Jesse goes to buy like the guitar case, and I can't remember the woman's name that he meets. Like, some of these interesting characters, they're not in the book for huge amounts of time, but they leave such a great impression. Can you talk to us a little bit about creating the characters and how the characters played a role in the overarching narrative?
I guess that all comes in the process, C, I've got a soft spot for C because she's as damaged as Ash in many ways, and I think that's why C and Ash, certainly why C is drawn to Ash. She sees another damaged character that she knows needs help. But the incidental characters, I mean, my favorites are what are they called? My own novel, the blood, the guys with the blood disorder in the cafe. They're because they're not in the novel for very long at all, and I could write a novel about them because they're a really interesting bunch. And it's a lot of that is just wanting to give more flavor to the world, to sort of get the idea over that there's other stuff going on with in this world. It's not just the Rainmakers. That's the story I'm telling, but there's loads of other stuff going on as well.
Well, listen, The Last Storm, and listen, environmental horror is like my shit. Like, The Sheep Look Up is one of my all-time favorite books, of all time.
Not read it. The Sheep Look Up.
The Sheep Look Up by John Brunner.
Right. Okay.
All right. Listen.
I'm gonna know.
John Skip and I, Skip came on my podcast to talk about The Sheep Look Up, because The Sheep Look Up was a huge inspiration for my Cli-fi novel. But The Sheep Look Up, written in the early 70s. Are you familiar with Brunner?
No, I'm not.
No. Oh, okay. I'm gonna blow your mind now. Okay, John Brunner, like I know I do a Philip K. Dick podcast, but John Brunner, who is like the British equivalent of Philip K. Dick,
Right.
in the 60s and 70s, he was as prolific, and but he did a series of environmental novels that are considered his masterpieces, starting with he won the Hugo with a novel called The Stand on Zanzibar. And I think Brunner's Brunner's like my all-time favorite science fiction writer.
Right. I shall
And
try him out.
yeah, but The Sheep Look Up, I consider to be top 10 horror novel and top 10 science fiction novel at the same time.
Wow.
And I literally sold a pre-order of The Last Storm to a friend by just saying, because he asked me, he's like, oh, so it's an environmental horror novel. Is it Sheep Look Up good? And I said, yeah, it's good. I said, yeah, it's Sheep Look. I said, Sheep Look Up is like one of my all-time classics, but I was like, yeah, you'll put it on the shelf with it. And then he was like, okay. And so that's a lot for me to say that what I really think is fantastic about this book and what's different. I mean, that book for its time was kind of a hard sci-fi, and some of it's outdated because it was written in 72. But what I think is really, really fantastic about this book is that this is real world fears and concerns, but it is a supernatural story with family elements. So we got all these things. We've got all these things that come together. And but it has a lot of deeper meaning. So I really just appreciate on a storytelling level that The Last Storm, I think, combines a lot of the elements that you've been working towards. Like,
sure.
Do you feel like I don't know, is this feel like a final statement on climate change and those things, or do you think it's a more of a jumping off point? Where is this an issue you're going to tackle again? And maybe I should have done this outside of spoilers, but
no, that's okay, because without a doubt I'll write about it again. I mean, I am working on another novel now called Symbiotic, which does have climate change aspects. Not as overt as this and Eden, but still something that is driving the story.
Well, it's the most horrifying thing in the world right now, and it should be for people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's always like you've said, and I've said, I'm a massive lover of nature, and I always have been, and that's down to my mum and my dad. So you're right about what scares you, don't you? And what scares me is what we've done to the world and the effects it's starting to have and is continuing to have and will continue to have, because we're not doing enough about it, So and I extrapolate that in these books and turn them into thrillers and adventure novels. But the core message is we've fucked up the world, and we should be more concerned about what we're doing to it now, really. We could have a whole another hour talking about that.
Yeah, I know. And I don't want to be super, super depressing about it. And
no.
But you've written just straight thrillers like The Hunt, and and obviously like to do monster stories and do those things. But I think the reason why some of us keep returning to climate as a theme is because it is the most horrifying thing that we're dealing with, and especially for people like I don't have children, but I think that if I had children or grandchildren, like I think it would be even more frightening, and I don't understand why more people aren't frightened.
Absolutely. I mean, I've got two kids. My daughter's 23, my son's 19 soon. My daughter's actually doing a master's degree in climate change at the moment. So, I say to her, you're never going to be out of work, because, through her lifetime, the world's going to be changing. And I should say that I'm still an optimist at heart, and I still think that we can. And that's why a sort of a sub theme of this book is adaptation. People in the desert, which I call this part of America, which is famine struck and drought struck. They're adapting and surviving, and I think we will.
Well, and that's
going to be a lot of change.
That's one of the things that is Well, and when I promote Sheep Look Up, it is one of the most depressing books you'll ever read.
Right.
But a lot of it, and I have had people tell me like, you know, like, I'm not thanking you for suggesting that book to me because it's so
Okay.
depressing. However, a lot of it is about pollution, and we
Right.
did make strides
Yeah.
in pollution in our world. So, part of the warning didn't quite fall on deaf ears, and that's partially for Rachel Carson writing Silent Spring as well. And I think uh, it's one of the lovely things that you've been able to do with your career is write some of these books that have these environmental themes. You know, and hopefully you gain readers by doing your Hellboys and your Fireflies and things, and get
Yeah.
them to these serious works. And it's one of the things that I really appreciate about your work, Tim,
Yeah.
and have always appreciated about the depth that you bring to the horror that you write.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And also enjoy following your stories of your long distance running and all that stuff, which I think is very, very interesting to read about. And I've always thought it was cool that you turned it into a thriller with The Hunt, which
Yeah. I mean, that was
never understood how that wasn't a movie either, because
Oh
that
man, there's a long history to that. So originally that was going to be a movie that got really high up in one of the studios the same time as The Silence was just getting there. And for a month or two, I was thinking I'm going to have two Hollywood movies made in the same year, And
yeah.
then as these things happen, it didn't happen there. So that had a really big writer attached as well. So then and then another writer took it on and adapted it for TV, and it was optioned by TNT for a couple of years. He wrote a pilot, and that never happened. I've written my own spec script based on The Hunt, which my manager has got, and we're getting ready to show it around now. So,
well, and I would think specifically with that story, your exact experience would be very crucial and important to
yeah, it's,
selling that.
Yeah, write
concept.
about what you know. That's the main reason I wrote that novel. I thought I'd do all these Ironmans and running up and down mountains and stuff. Let's write about it, and I did. So I'm the character in the book, except I've never been shot at.
Right. All right. Well, just to wrap things up, I just really enjoyed this book. I definitely think it's my favorite thing of yours I've read since The Silence. And not that I haven't liked the stuff in between. I just think this is I think this is definitely one of your most powerful works in a really strong way. And it's one and I do want to say it's a book that stayed with me and gnawed at me a little bit after it was done. And that's good. The best thing you can ask for in a book is that I want to like the book more as I think about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's good.
And I think one of the things that people should I take a lesson from, and because a lot of the people that listen to these spoiler reviews are writers who are big readers that want hints, and what I think another thing that's really great about the writing of this book is that the character work and the world building are all there's no wasted space. You're not overdoing things in this book. And I love that. I wish more writers would not. You don't have to spend 5 pages describing a tree if you do a good job, setting the place. And Jesse, for example, is just he's such a fully formed character, and that also on a spoiler level, because we are in spoilers, the ending for the guy was something that I wasn't looking that I didn't see coming, and was also pretty brutal.
And again, that's something that I didn't really plan until I got very close to the end, and the sort of final, the final few chapters, the final showdown. I thought they can't all get through this, so that was pretty good as well. Well,
and I think it's an important journey for Ash, and I think kind of sets her up as kind of coming into her own, and this is it's a nice thematic, unintentional thematic bookend where they see her as dead at the beginning, and then then they all have to learn to live without Jesse at the end. So well done. Well done.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. That's good.
All right. So Tim, is there anything you want to tell people? You got so much coming out in this year. Do you want to pitch those? I guess I should have done that before spoilers, but
yeah, sure. Well, I recently had 2 books out with PS Publishing. One's called All Nightmare Long, which is a new collection, and the other one's called Without Walls, which is a illustrated novella written with Danielle Serra, the Sardinian artist, amazing artist, a good friend. Last Storm is out. What's the date? So it's out on the 12th in the UK and the 19th in the US. And then
so it got pushed back, right?
It's been pushed back. There's delivery problems, and there's the paper shortage hasn't helped. I don't think. Only been pushed back like 2 weeks, I think, in the States.
Okay, well, I'll pay attention to that because I want to release this after people have the ability.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Oh, of course. Yeah. So that they've read it. Yeah. Brilliant. I'm really excited about it, and I've got a novella with Chris Golden out from Dark Horse, which is illustrated by Peter Bergting. And it's just amazing. His artwork is incredible. So it's another heavily illustrated novella. It's not a comic. It's a full novella length story with loads of great illustrations from Peter in there. That's out in, I think that's September or October, so later this year.
Now I have one last question that's just like a personal Tim Lebbon writer question, which is, when you go for these runs, do you listen to music? Do you not listen to music? And how much of your storytelling is developed on these runs where you're on these long runs?
So very little, to be honest. I never listen to music. I like to be out in nature and just it's my own headspace, I guess.
I hate hearing my breath when I'm running.
Oh, do you? Right. Okay.
I can't stand hearing myself breathe. So when I run, I listen to music, and I pump it loud.
I mean, I'm a massive music fan. I listen to music. I put music on the minute I get up and turn it off when I go to bed. And I love music, but when I'm exercising, I don't listen to it. When I'm writing, I listen to music virtually all the time. But no, exercising also very little story thinking. Just occasionally something will pop in and I'll think, oh, that'll work. But I don't go out with the aim of thinking through plot problems or anything. I just go out, and I think it clears my head. It's like my meditation in a way. I mean, I do sort of do a little bit of meditation here and there anyway, but the best meditation for me is getting out into the countryside with a pair of trainers on and doing a few miles down along the local river, just being absorbed by nature. And it's just the best.
Yeah, I'm a big basketball guy, and I love playing basketball, and not when you're playing in a game because you have to have focus, but when Josh Mallerman and I talked about this when he was on the podcast, is a lot of times when I'm just shooting hoops by myself. It's funny because there'll be times where it's like within the moments of just nailing a shot, and then like my brain goes like, here's this thing. But it's not all the time, but it's an interesting thing. But
it's
the
never
creative
forced either. It's never forced, is it? It's your brain working in the background.
Yep, that's what it is. Well, Tim, I really enjoyed this conversation. The Last Storm is incredible. You will forever have a place in my heart as having written that scene in the silence that just broke me.
I'm sorry.
In all the right ways. I'm the guy who likes the grim, darkest shit. I like when a book makes me crack. Because I think that's when a writer is working on all cylinders, if they can make you crack. See, people who are like, oh, it made me feel awful. I'm like, hey, you felt something.
Yeah, it worked, Yeah, it is a difficult scene. And I discovered in The Hunt, I think I was nasty to some dogs as well, and somebody pointed it out, and it was, again, I suppose it's, I'm a dog lover and writing about what scares me, stuff happening to my dog.
Exactly.
So,
Yes, yes, indeed. All right, Tim, it was great talking to you with you, and I hope everyone will continue to check out the new stuff and read you religiously. So thank you for joining us.
Cheers. Thank you very much.